game, relations with ourselves, the world around us, and the greater universe, finding our way back home.
Greetings and welcome back to another talk on the ABE communications, and again looking at the reality game. And I'd like to go through a few messages from the final part of the penultimate chapter or session number 5, talking about human energy and consciousness. And perhaps this part of the messages, ABE is talking about how we are part of something greater than us, the way we can participate in something greater than ourselves, but how we need to listen to that. And if we don't listen, then we get caught up in our divisions and our kind of human-made identities. So Abe starts talking about how we're all part of systems within systems, or rather life within life. Because if I talk about systems, some people may start to thinking machinic terms or mechanical terms. Abe is talking about life systems. We're all involved in different levels and interrelations of living systems. So, and each part of those living systems is evolving and developing in its own way, in correlation with other developments in their own way. So it's about, and Abe says this, quote, "And like the earth that has its own system, and the body has its own system, and the cosmos, but all interrelating, all listening to one another, evolving, incorporating their own vantage, working with but one intelligence." So that short message there is saying we're all living systems, interrelating, the cosmos, the earth, the human body, and they're all listening, or should be listening, and incorporating their own vantage. That means their own perspective, their own vantage point. That we're all listening and incorporating other systems' perspectives and vantage points. We're not pushing them out. Everything is incorporated. But Abe says, well, the problem is the humans are fighting over one another. In a nice little phrase, Abe says, it's like the student, but always over talking the teacher. It's like we're answering back and we're not listening. So we're over talking the living systems and not listening to what they're trying to tell us. And Abe says that, quote, "But that connection is not gone, no matter where you are, unless you are not willing to listen. Listen to yourselves to connect back up." So that connection is always there, but we've put ourselves out of sync with it because we're not listening to these interrelational living vibrational systems. So our vibrational resonance is out of sync. And if we don't understand this, then we miss the point. Abe says here, quote, "If you do so sync up again, if you vibrationally allow yourselves to fall back into this integrative system, this life force, this intelligence, you know that it is but in and around everything. Life is but orchestrated, and when you're back in rhythm, back in sync, you can allow yourselves to be both the enjoyer of it and also the conductor." So you see, like that, when we're part of it, when we sync up, when we fall back into rhythm, into the correct alignment, then we are both the enjoyer of it and the conductor. We're both sings. But of course, we're restricting ourselves because we're falling out of sync and we're starting putting on these very isolated identities, filters onto us. So we have our own dissonance. Abe refers again, Abe often uses the analogy of the Russian Matryoshka dolls, you know, the doll, small doll within a larger doll within a larger doll. Um, and they use that to kind of give analogy for the integration of consciousness and living systems and living intelligence. On this point, Abe says, quote, "It is again like the analogy of the dolls. The tighter and tighter the filter, the construct of your identity, the less you allow to flow." So, of course, imagine that the great flow of life, the great intelligence of life is this large doll, and then inside you get smaller and smaller dolls, which are constrictions. Then imagine humanity, perhaps one of the very smaller dolls. We've constricted ourselves in our own kind of isolated identities. You know, we are the only life around here in the cosmos. Um, I'm Joe Bloggs. I'm Kingsley Dennis. You're, you know, whatever, John Doe, Mary Bly. We're all these identities, and we get kind of restricted by them. They become our filters, but our darkened filters. And Abe then uses the analogy of colored sweets to say, then once we place these identities onto us, we start to pick and choose through those identities only by the color of the sweets, the externalities. We start to get divided by these identities. Here they're using an analogy using the sweet Smarties. I'm not sure if you get them in the larger field, but in the UK and Europe, I think in America we had the little Smarties sweets, little chocolate with colored kind of coatings, and each sweets had different colors. And so Abe says we get lost in our distractions, picking and choosing over the different colored sweets. Here they say, quote, "It's like sorting through a box of Smarties, saying, I only like the orange ones. They may have but a differing color, a slightly different taste, but in the end, all are just Smarties." So you see, there's a kind of suggestion that we're falling out of sync, out of resonance, out of flow, because we're getting pulled into these kind of identity filters. And I think we can see that in the world around us now. There are certain societal and cultural mechanisms which are imposing identities onto people and onto segments of society, which is causing a lot of division. And then people start, you know, fighting over certain identities which they've invested in. And Abe says, well, if you keep on doing that, we cannot meet ourselves. We cannot meet others, and we cannot meet ourselves. And again, you know, we're not listening. And in this thing about meeting ourselves, Abe says, quote, "As humans, you fight this whisper. You do so drag it through the mud far too much. It is about meeting yourselves with an open heart, with an open mind, for then you see all can flow." So you see, we're fighting this whisper that's going through society, and we're attaching to these whispers and these noises. And we cannot meet other people in the right place or the right frequency because we're not meeting ourselves first. We're not meeting with an open heart, an open mind, and in flow. And Abe says that we are cutting off our hearts through this fear, and we're seeding ourselves off, closing off ourselves. Again, they say, how can we meet anybody in such a place or a space as this if we have not met ourselves first? It's time to drop our proclivity for labeling in order to facilitate the flow of allowance. Again, the idea of decontaminating ourselves so we can be in allowance and listening rather than getting pulled into these whispers of these identity filters. So, something to finish on there. So, as always, stay well, stay sane in this crazy world, and be in allowance. And as always, stay grounded. Cheers.